voluntarily or you haven't been arrested and they haven't read you your Miranda rights, yes, you're not officially in custody. You're free to leave at any time. If you, as it happened in the case of the Supreme Court, just fall silent when faced with a tough question, the prosecutor can go to the jury and say, an innocent person wouldn't have done this. They would have proclaimed their innocence.
That proceedings under the call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise this evening to discuss an amendment that I have filed to the immigration bill. It's Senate Amendment 1255. It would ensure that the funding for an important border security program known as Operation Stone Garden continues to be allocated by the Department of Homeland Security based on risk. Without my amendment, 90% of the $50 million in funding for this program awarded annually would be earmarked for the southwest border. What I'm proposing is that we not put a percentage in the bill, but rather allow for a risk-based assessment of where Operation Stone Garden monies would best be spent. This program has been extraordinarily successful in my state of Maine. It has helped federal, county, state, and local law enforcement to pool their resources and work together to help secure our border. While the southwest border is much more likely to make the evening news, we must not forget about our northern border. As the Department of Homeland Security pointed out when it released its first northern border strategy in June of 2012, quote, "The U.S.-Canadian border is the longest common border in the world and presents unique security challenges based on geography, weather, and the immense volume of trade and travel," end quote. According to a report released by the GAO in 2010, the Border Patrol had situational awareness of only 25% of the 4,000-mile northern border and operational control of only 32 miles, less than 1%. We'll hear those terms discussed a lot during the debate on immigration with respect to the southwest border. I think it's important that we not forget that we also have a 4,000-mile northern border. This lack of situational awareness and operational control is especially troubling because, as GAO has observed, DHS reports that the terrorist threat on the northern border is actually higher than on the southern border, given the large expanse of area with very limited law enforcement coverage. In the same report, GAO noted that the maritime border on the Great Lakes and rivers is vulnerable to use by small vessels as a conduit for the potential smuggling and exploitation by terrorists, alien smuggling, trafficking of illicit drugs, and other contraband and criminal activity. Also, the northern border's waterways frequently freeze during the winter and can be easily crossed by foot, vehicle, or snowmobile. The northern air border is also vulnerable to low-flying aircraft that, for example, smuggle drugs by entering U.S. airspace from Canada. Additionally, Customs and Border Protection report that further threats result from the fact that the northern border is exploited by well-organized smuggling operations, which can potentially also support the movement of terrorists and their weapons. There's also regrettably significant criminal activity on the northern border. In the same report, GAO noted that in fiscal year 2010, DHS has reported spending nearly $3 billion in its efforts to interdict and investigate illegal northern border activity, annually making approximately 6,000 arrests and interdicting approximately 40,000 pounds of illegal drugs at and between the northern border ports of entry. The Operation Stone Garden grant program is an effective resource for addressing security concerns on our northern, southern, western coastal borders. Over the past 4 years, approximately $247 million in Operation Stone Garden funds have been allocated to 19 border states using a risk-based analysis for determining the allocations rather than the formula-based analysis that is included in this immigration bill. Earmarking 90% of funding from Operation Stone Garden to the southwest border is ill-advised. Operation Stone Garden grants should be used to help secure our northern, southern, and coastal borders by funding joint operations between the Border Patrol and state, county, and local law enforcement. These joint operations can act as a force multiplier in areas that would otherwise be unguarded altogether. My amendment would ensure that DHS continues to have the flexibility it needs to make risk-informed decisions about where Operation Stone Garden funds will best serve the security of our nation's borders. I urge my colleagues to support my amendment and hope that it will be brought up at some point tomorrow. Thank you, Madam President.
Madam President.
Senator from Pennsylvania.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise. Yes.
Madam President.
Mr. Leader.
I ask unanimous consent that when I complete my request here that the Senator from Pennsylvania be recognized.
Yes.
I ask unanimous consent that the following amendments be in order to be called up and that they not be subject to modification or division, with the exception of technical modifications to the Merkley and Paul amendments contained in this agreement. The amendments are Manchin 1268, Pryor 1298, Merkley 1237 as modified with the changes that are at the desk, Boxer 1240, Reed, Rhode Island 1224, Cornyn 1251, Lee 1208, Paul 1200 as modified with the changes at the desk, Heller 1227, and Cruz 1320. Finally, that no second degree amendments be in order to any of these amendments prior to votes in relation to the amendments.
Is there objection? Without objection.
Madam President, we now have these amendments in order, and we'll work with all the parties to see if we can have some way of proceeding to set up votes on these matters. I would hope that we can work something out so that we don't have to do procedural things to try to get rid of them. We're starting to do our utmost. I appreciate everyone's cooperation getting this long list of amendments so that we can start voting on them. I think it'd be a pretty fair assumption that we're not going to have any votes tonight on these amendments. We'll work something out tomorrow. Here it's 7 o'clock, and we still have a little more work to do on other issues.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise this evening to make some brief comments regarding the judicial nominee that we voted on yesterday, one of two, Judge Luis Restrepo from Philadelphia, from the southeastern corner of Pennsylvania. And I rise tonight because my train was late last night, so I wasn't able to make some comments about his nomination, his qualifications prior to the vote, but I was honored that he received the vote of the Senate last night. I also rise because it's timely in another in another way because we're considering immigration reform. And I was on the floor last week talking about yet another judicial nominee from Pennsylvania, now Judge, as of last week, now Judge Nitza Quiñones, who is a native of Puerto Rico, came to this country after her education and became a lawyer and an advocate and then ultimately a judge for more than 2 decades now, and now will serve on the Eastern District, Federal District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania. And so it is true of now Judge Restrepo, a native of Colombia. Judge Restrepo became a U.S. citizen in 1993. He earned a Bachelor of Arts degree from the University of Pennsylvania in 1981 and a Juris Doctorate degree from Tulane University School of Law in 1986. He's highly regarded by lawyers and members of the bench. He exhibits an extraordinary command of the law and legal principles, as well as a sense of fairness, sound judgment, and integrity. Judge Restrepo has served as a magistrate judge for the United States District Court for the Eastern District of Pennsylvania since June of 2006. Prior to his judicial appointment, he was a highly regarded lawyer and a founding member of the Krasner and Restrepo firm in Philadelphia, concentrating on both civil rights litigation as well as criminal defense work. He served as an assistant federal defender with the Community Federal Defender of the Eastern District of Pennsylvania from 1990 to 93, and assistant defender at the Defender Association of Philadelphia from 1987 to 1990. An adjunct professor at Temple University James E. Beasley School of Law, was also an adjunct professor at the University of Pennsylvania School of Law from 1997 to 2009, and has taught with the National Institute for Trial Advocacy in regional and national programs since 1992. I know the presiding officer knows something about being a law professor and the demands of that job and the demands of being an advocate. And I think anyone who looks at Judge Restrepo's biography and background would agree that he's more than prepared to be a federal district judge, and I'm grateful that the Senate confirmed him. And finally, Judge Restrepo has also served on the Board of Governors for the Philadelphia Bar Association and is a past president of the Hispanic Bar Association of Pennsylvania. So for all those reasons and more, I believe he's not only ready to be a federal judge, but I'm also here to express gratitude for his confirmation and for the vote in the Senate. And as we consider immigration reform, we should be ever inspired by the stories that we hear from not only judges who are nominated and confirmed here, but others as well, who come to this country, who work hard, who learn a lot and want to give back to their country by way of public service. And Judge Restrepo this week and Judge Quiñones last week are 2 fine examples of that. And with that, Madam President, I would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
The clerk will call the roll. Mr. Alexander.
Madam President.
Senator, yes, sorry. Senator from Alabama.
I would ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Madam President, the sponsor of the prime sponsor, I suppose, of the immigration bill before us, this 1,000-page document, Senator Schumer, announced earlier today, based on the Congressional Budget Office report, that we promised lower deficits, and the bill produces lower deficits. I don't believe that's an accurate statement, and I'll share with you some of my concerns about that. And we've been through this before, and it's a way that the budget numbers in reality have been utilized in a way that's not healthy. And it creates a false impression of what's occurring here. Second, I don't know that he talked about this. I doubt that he did. The CBO report is explicit. Under this legislation, if it were to pass, the wages of American workers will fall for the next 12 years. They will be lower than inflation rate. They will decline from the present unacceptably low rate, continue to decline for 12 years, according to this report. That alone should cause us to defeat this bill. We've been told it's going to create prosperity and growth, but what it's going to produce is more unemployment, as this report explicitly states. It's going to produce lower wages for Americans, as this report explicitly states, and it's going to increase the deficit. So I think we need to have an understanding here that something very serious is afoot. To suggest that you can bring in millions of new workers to take jobs in the United States at a time of record unemployment, and that won't impact wages, that won't make unemployment go up, goes beyond all common sense. Dr. Borjas at Harvard has absolutely proven through peer-reviewed research that that is exactly what's going to happen. Wages go down, as they have been going down, and unemployment will go up. So this report confirms that. I'll just read some of the things that are in it. Quote, I'm on page 7 of the economic impact of S-744. Quote, S-744 would allow significantly more workers with low skills and with high skills to enter the United States. No doubt about that. They say it's a move to merit-based immigration, but it's not a move to merit-based immigration. It increases low-skilled workers substantially, as well as increasing other workers. Taking into account all those flows of new immigrants, CBO and the joint tax expect that a greater number of immigrants with lower skills than with higher skills will be added to the workforce. In other words, of the group coming in, more will be lower skilled than high skilled, just as I have indicated and other commentators have indicated previously. Going on to say this, quotes, slightly pushing down the average wage of the labor force as a whole, pushing down the wage of the of the labor force as a whole. But they go on to say this, get this, the next sentence. However, CBO and joint tax expect that currently unauthorized workers, illegal workers, in other words, who obtain legal status under 744 will see an increase in their wages. I think this underestimates, if you read the report carefully, the adverse impact that the flow of workers will have on the wages of American workers and lawful immigrants who are here today. But at any rate, it's clear that that's so. He goes on to say this, dramatically, I suggest. the average wage would be lower than under current law over the first dozen years. And it says, CBO estimates that it would increase unemployment for at least 7 years. So this is supposed to be good for the people we represent. And, of course, I would like to ask, again, our colleagues to think carefully about our duty here, who it is we represent in this body, and what kind of responsibilities we have to decent, hard-working Americans who experts have told us have seen their wages decline every year virtually since 1999. They've declined by as much as 8% since 2009 for a number of reasons. One of the reasons, according to Professor Borjas, is immigration, already pulling down wages by as much as 40%. So this will add to the problems, what this report says, quite clearly, unequivocally. It's going to increase unemployment, and it's going to pull down wages. That is exactly the wrong thing that ought to be happening at this time. How in the world can we justify passing a bill that hammers the American working man and woman who's out trying to feed a family, get a job, that has a little retirement, a little health care, some money to be able to take care of the family, and hammer them with additional adverse economic impacts? I suggest to you this is not a report that in any way justifies advancing this legislation. And let me just take a moment. I've wrestled with these numbers, and I see the presiding officer on the Budget Committee understands these numbers. They say it pays down the deficit. Let me show you what it really says. And this is the way they double counted the money to justify Obamacare. Basically, they created, through cuts in Medicare savings, and it lengthened the life of Medicare, but they claim they used that same money to fund Obamacare. And at one point, Mr. Elmendorf, the director of the Office of Management and Budget, who wrote this book, said it was double counting the money. You can't use the same money to fund Obamacare and use that same money to strengthen Medicare. How simple is that? We're talking about hundreds of billions of dollars in double counting of money. And that's what's happening here. Look at this report. Impact on the deficit. Over the 10-year period, 2014 to 2023, the on-budget deficit would increase by $14.2 billion. The debt would increase by $14.2 trillion. But then they say the off-budget money would decrease the deficit by $211 billion. And my colleague, Senator Schumer, says this is all great. We got a big surplus now. We got a $200 billion in the off-budget account. But what is that money, colleagues? What is that money? That's the payroll taxes. That's your Social Security payment and your Medicare payment. When more of the illegal aliens come in and get a Social Security number and pay Social Security and Medicare, the money comes into the government, all right. But is it free to be spent on bridges and roads and aircraft and salaries for congressmen and senators? No. This is money that's dedicated to Social Security and Medicare. This is the trust fund money that goes to Social Security and Medicare. Yes, when people are legalized, they'll pay more Social Security and Medicare taxes on their payroll, but it's going to that fund to pay for their retirement and their health care when they retire. You can't use that money. You can't spend the money today and pretend it's going to be there to pay for their retirement when they retire. They're going to pay into Medicare, they're going to pay into Social Security, and they're going to draw out Social Security and Medicare when they reach the right age. And what we know is, as Mr. Elmendorf indicated, and as I have said repeatedly, most of these individuals are lower income, lower skilled workers. Therefore, what we know is, in that regard, that the lower skilled workers who pay into Social Security and Medicare take out more than they pay in. So this is not going to be positive there, it seems to me, but particularly when you account for that. A lot of people have scored this, but they haven't scored it from the fact that most of the workers that will be paying Medicare and Social Security are lower income workers, and they'll be paying the lower rates. Not a huge difference, but it is a difference. So I would contend, I think without fear of serious contradiction, although I expect political contradiction, that the off-budget money is your Medicare and Social Security money. See? And you paid into that. The government, if it takes and spends it, doesn't have anything now to pay your Social Security and your Medicare benefits when you get old. And we know it's already actuarially unsound. These programs are in danger of defaulting a lot sooner than a lot of people think. We need to be saving these programs, not weakening them. So in the short run, you get this bubble effect. You get an extra group of money, and since a lot of the workers are younger, it will look good on the budget for 10 years, see? It looks good on the budget for 10 years, but this is not money to be spent by the government. This is money that's dedicated to their retirement and will be drawn out by these individuals when they go into retirement. So I would suggest that this 10-year score, 2014 through 2023, shows that the real impact is a $14.2 billion increase in the deficit of the United States over 10 years in the general fund account. And the off-budget says it reduces the deficit by $200 billion, but that money is utilized, has got to be in the trust fund to be utilized for future payments to these individuals when they retire. It's not money that we can account. And the mixing of these two matters is one of the most dramatic ways this country has gotten itself into an unsound financial course. We have double counted this money repeatedly. We have money coming in to Social Security and Medicare, and we spend it immediately, and we pretend it's still there to pay for somebody's retirement. And this is going to be the same, except it's guaranteed to be a financial loser over the long run. And again, I know Senator Sanders has talked about this, a colleague from Vermont, about in a free market world, you bring in more labor, the wages go down. I think CBO is probably underestimating this, frankly. Professor Borjas at Harvard, his numbers look more grim than these. But this is what they came up with. They've been trying to be, I guess, work here and tell the truth as best they can. But they're getting a lot of pressure from the other side, and a lot of members here just seem to think that we can just bring in millions of people, and that these millions of people will somehow create more revenue, and we're going to be like Jack Kemp, you know. Everything's wonderful, it's just going to grow. But we have to be prudent. We have to be responsible. What we know is that since at least 1999, the wages of average American people have not kept up with inflation. That means those wages are on a net serious decline. Professor Borjas said it's declined by 8%. That is very real. My Democratic colleagues used to be very critical when it was President Bush because it was all his fault. Their wages weren't keeping up with inflation. People were being hurt. So now they don't talk about that anymore, and if they do, they blame it on President Bush, even though he's been gone 5 or 6 years. But the reality is, I came to believe there's truth to this. And it's not just a temporary, cyclical thing that workers' wages haven't been keeping up right. I think it's something deeper than that. I think several things. Businesses are getting very, very intent on reducing the number of employees that they have to produce certain products and widgets. And they're getting far more efficient. So we're making more widgets with less people. If you go into plants like I do, you see these incredible robotics that are there, and you get dramatic improvements in productivity of widgets for less people. And this creates, in some ways, unemployment. Last month, we had a moderate increase in jobs in May, but there was an 8,000 job reduction in manufacturing. And the increase was in service industries like our restaurants and bars and that kind of thing. And increase was also temporary. So this isn't healthy. So you got this unhealthy trend out there, and when you bring in large amounts of labor, a majority of which the CBO says is low-skilled, you are hammering the American worker. Further, Peter Kirsanow, one of the outstanding members of the U.S. Commission on Civil Rights, along with Abigail Thernstrom, a brilliant lady who's written on these matters over the years, they wrote a letter recently that warned that passage of this bill will hammer poor people in America, and particularly African Americans. And they said they had hearings on it, and they've had the best economists come and testify, and they've studied those reports, and they say not a single one of the economists that they dealt with denied that the wages would be pulled down or unemployment would go up, and that's what CBO's told us today. Unemployment will go up, wages will go down. We've got good Republican colleagues. They can't conceive that we're in such a circumstance. They just believe growth is just always good, and if you bring in more people, you'll have more growth. And that is correct. But let me tell you the brutal truth based on the in-depth analysis by Professor Borjas at Harvard. He says the prosperity, the growth, inures to the benefit of the manufacturers, of the employers who use a lot of low-skilled labor. Their income will go up, but the average wage of the average working person will go down. That's what large flows of immigration will do when you've got high unemployment. Peter Kirsanow, a member of the Civil Rights Commission, in his letter said it's absolutely false that we have a shortage of low-skilled labor. He says we have a glut of low-skilled labor, and the facts show that. I mean, unemployment, the number of people employed in the workforce today has reached the level of the 1970s. That was before women were going into the workplace. So as a percentage of the American population, the percentage of people actually having a job today has been falling steadily. And it's now hit the level of the 1970s. And now we're going to bring in all these masters of the universe, these geniuses who have this plan that somehow are going to fix everything. We'll just bring in more people. And we had a senator today say it's going to increase wages. How can that be? What economic study shows that? Not any, to my knowledge. What the CBO says, wages are going to fall. Unemployment is going to go up. And it's not going to fix our deficit either. So, Mr. President, I just feel very strongly that we've got to put on a realistic hat here. We're going to have to ask ourselves, who do we represent? Are we representing a political idea that's going to bring in more votes? Are we representing people who entered the country illegally? Are those our first priority? Do we have any obligation to the people who fight our wars, raise our next generation of children, try to do the right thing, pay their taxes, want to be able to have a decent job, a decent retirement plan, have a vacation every now and then, have a health care plan that they can afford? Don't we owe them that? Shouldn't that be our primary responsibility right now? I think it is. I think that's our primary responsibility. You say, well, don't you care about people that are here illegally? Yes, I care about them. And I care about them deeply. And I think we can work on this situation to not be in a position to say we're going to deport people, all of them that are here illegally, and we can treat people compassionately. We're going to do the right thing about that. But in the future, should we have a workflow every year in the future that doubles the amount of guest workers that come in for the sole purposes of working and not becoming an immigrant? And should we increase the annual legal flow of immigrants from 1 million a year to 1.5 million a year, increasing it 50%? Is that what good legislation would do? I mean, how did this happen? Thomas Sowell, a Hoover Institution scholar and economist at Stanford University, he says, well, you got three interests out here. One is the immigrant. They win. This report says their salaries go up. The other one is the politicians. They've got it all figured out. They've written a bill that they think serves their political interest. But the question is, who's representing the national interest? Who's representing the American people's interest? Were they in these rooms when the Chamber of Commerce was there and the La Raza was there and the business groups and the agricultural groups and the labor unions, Mr. Trumka, were there dividing up the pie, making sure their interests were protected? Who was defending the interest of the dutiful worker who's out trying to find a job today? There was a report in the New York Times last week about an event in Queens. Apparently there was a group of jobs that were going to be offered as elevator repair personnel in New York. The line started forming 5 days in advance. People brought their tents, they brought their food, they brought their sleeping bags, and they waited in line for days to be able to get a job as an elevator repair person. And we got people saying, these are jobs Americans won't do. The Americans won't work. Well, I just noticed the group, I always cut my grass, but I'm up here a lot, that came out and cut my grass in Mobile. Came out, these were 2 African-American gentlemen in their 40s. Came out and did a great job in the heat in Alabama and took care of my yard. What is this that jobs Americans won't do? They want a job that has a retirement plan. They want a job that has some permanency to it. They want a job that has a decent wage. But Americans will work. I'll acknowledge that in seasonal work, temporary work circumstances, we could develop a good migrant, good guest worker program that could serve that. And maybe at different times, if unemployment's low, we could justify bringing in even more workers than you would expect. But in a time of high unemployment, when we've got a low participation in the workforce, we ought to be careful about bringing in large amounts of labor that pleases rich business, manufacturing, agribusiness groups, but doesn't necessarily protect the honest, decent, legitimate interest of American workers. And they're being forgotten, I think, too often in this process. So I wanted to push back today that this report might look like it says we're creating a surplus and that we're reducing the debt. And in one sense, on the on-budget analysis of the way we do our accounting around here, that impression is certainly created. But it's a false impression. And it's that false understanding of the reality of the on-budget and off-budget accounting of revenues to America that has gotten us fundamentally in the problem we are now in. So again, I repeat, the on-budget deficit, according to the CBO report, goes up over 10 years by $14 billion. It claims, though, that the deficit drops on the off-budget. But remember, that money is obligated. That's your withholding. That's your FICA. That's your Social Security, Medicare withholdings on your paycheck. It goes up there and it's being set aside for you, for your retirement, for your medical care when you're elderly. It's not available for us to spend today willy-nilly, and we think we've now created a circumstance where billions of dollars are being double counted. Can you imagine that? That's what we're doing in this country. We're counting trillions of dollars, really double counting it. Money that comes in, we count in the unified budget as income to the government. But it's dedicated income. And we owe the people who paid into it their Social Security check, their Medicare coverage. It's owed to them. And what we know is that when you have particularly lower, well, the whole program is unsustainable, but particularly the lower income workers pay in certainly less than they'll eventually take out over a lifetime. So adding all these workers onto the Social Security and Medicare system where they pay in, and it will not place us in a necessarily a sound path. So again, we need to be honest about where we are. The numbers do not look good. This Congress needs to wrestle with how to deal compassionately with the people that have been here a long time, and we need to do it in the right way. But we have a responsibility, a financial duty to the people who sent us here to manage their money wisely and not make our financial situation worse than it is today. We have an obligation to try to figure out a way to reverse this steady long-term trend of wage decline by millions of American workers. It needs to be getting better. And what this report says is, if this bill is passed, this immigration bill is passed, it will make the long-term wage situation of Americans worse. How wrong a direction could that be? And look, if we let the labor market just get a little tighter, we're going to find businesses who are willing to pay more to get a good worker. That's the free market. These business guys don't mind trying to Walmart seeks the very lowest priced product they can get, whether it's China or the United States. They're ruthless about it. It's free market, we say. We value it. Okay, we support free market. But why shouldn't, if there's a labor shortage, the laboring man be able to get a little higher wage for a change around here? And this large flow of immigration will impact adversely their ability to find a job. Unemployment will go up, according to the report, and to get an increase in wages. Mr. President, I thank the Chair. Would yield the floor and note the absence of quorum.
The clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
President,
Senator from Virginia.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with Senators. Oh, I'm sorry. Can we vitiate the quorum call?
Without objection.
Thanks, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to a period of morning business with Senators permitted to speak for up to 10 minutes each.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the immediate consideration of calendar number 79, S-Res 143.
The clerk will report.
Calendar number 79, Senate Resolution 143, recognizing the threats to freedom of the press and expression around the world, and so forth.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
I further ask the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be considered and made and laid upon the table, and no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to consideration of S-Res 173, which was submitted earlier today.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 173, designating September 2013 as National Child Awareness Month.
Is there objection to proceeding on the measure? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the Senate now proceed to the consideration of S-Res 174 submitted earlier today.
Clerk will report.
Senate Resolution 174, designating June 20th, 2013 as American Eagle Day, and so forth.
Is there objection to proceeding on the measure?
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
Madam President, I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn until 9:30 a.m. on Wednesday, June 19th, 2013, that following the prayer and pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, that the journal of proceedings be approved to date and the time for the two leaders be reserved for their use later in the day, and that following any leader remarks, the Senate be in a period of morning business for 1 hour with Senators permitted to speak therein for up to 10 minutes each, with the time equally divided and controlled between the two leaders or their designees, with the Republicans controlling the first half and the majority controlling the final half, and that following morning business, the Senate resume consideration of S-744, the Comprehensive Immigration Reform Bill.
Without objection.
We'll continue to work through the amendments to the immigration bill tomorrow. Senators will be notified when votes are scheduled. If there's no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order following the remarks of the Senator from Arizona.
Without objection.
Madam President.
Senator from Arizona.
Madam President, there are many reasons given to enact immigration reform. Being from Arizona, we bear a disproportionate burden in the state for the federal government's failure to have a secure border and to have a rational immigration system. There are many reasons, but fiscal reason isn't often brought up. We were just given a good fiscal reason today by the Congressional Budget Office. It came forward with their estimates of the cost of this legislation. Now, just a few minutes ago, we kind of heard the glass half empty speech, and I want to give one that's the glass half full, or actually decidedly more than that. CBO came forward, and let me just take a few of the top-line numbers. First, we're often told that if we enact this legislation, that the increase in population of those who come across illegally or legally in the next 10 years will be some 30 million people. That's disputed, I think, by the facts on the ground, but also CBO points out in their estimate. They say CBO estimates that by 2023 enacting S-744 would lead to a net increase of 10.4 million in the number of people residing in the United States compared with the number of people projected under current law. So it's significantly lower. There's been the best estimate that we have of the illegal population here is around 11 million. But this would also lead to a substantial decrease in the illegal population obviously coming across. And so we're looking at an increase in population of about 10.4 million over 10 years, decidedly lower than some of the estimates that are being thrown around. Let's talk about a few of the fiscal numbers. We're told that this would be extremely costly to enact this legislation. CBO says the following. This will lead to an increase in federal direct spending of $262 billion over the 2014 to 2003 period. Most of these outlays will be for increases in refundable tax credits, and on and on and on. So $262 billion in increased spending sounds significant until you consider that it will increase federal revenues, this legislation, by $459 billion over the 2014 to 2023 period. So $459 billion in increased revenue compared against $262 in increased direct spending. That's a $197 billion surplus or decrease in the deficit over the 10-year budget window. So we often hear that's okay for the first 10 years, but what happens after that? Well, CBO looked at that as well, and they said this. On balance, CBO and JCT, or the Joint Committee on Taxation, estimate that the changes in direct spending and revenues would decrease federal budget deficits by about $700 billion, or 0.02% of the gross domestic product over the period 2024 to 2033. Again, CBO and JCT estimate that the changes in direct spending and revenue will decrease federal budget deficits by about $700 billion over the second 10-year budget window. So I know that CBO reports, we often point out on this side of the aisle, the other side of the aisle does as well. These reports are only as good as the assumptions that you make when you do these reports. Duly noted. But I think it's still instructive to look at this and dispel some of the wild rumors that are out there about the costs of this legislation when CBO actually comes forward and says that over a 20-year budget window, $700 billion decrease in federal deficits. That, Madam President, is significant. Let me also say that CBO looked at how this legislation would affect the economy going forward. And they look at further budget window. 744, they say, would boost economic output, taking into account all economic effects, including those reflected in the cost estimate. Again, they're talking about the direct spending that would increase through parts of this legislation as well. If you take that into account, still, it says this bill would increase real inflation-adjusted GDP relative to the amount CBO projects under the current law by 3.3% in 2023 and 5.4% in 2033. Again, increasing economic activity by 3.3% in 2023 and by 5.4% in 2033. That is substantial. When you look at the legislation, you look at what will happen when we increase legal immigration in ways that help the economy, particularly on the H-1B side, high-tech, STEM visas. We all know intuitively that that will help us because those individuals who come with these kind of degrees boost economic output and increase jobs. It's going to help this economy. And this spells it out in dramatic fashion. 3.3% increase in 2023 simply owing to this legislation, 5.4% in 2033 just owing to this legislation. So in summary, I just want to say that CBO estimates are only as good as the assumptions you make. But when they look at this legislation in a dispassionate way, as nonpartisan as they can get, they come up with figures that show that net revenue over expenses is quite substantial, over $700 billion